Hello there. So we know that Hitler had already achieved quite a lot by 1938. We already know about him rearming. We already know about him getting back the Saar, about him remilitarising the Rhineland. So the people of Germany are quite happy with him. But the next move is the thing that he really wants. If you have a look at this map in front of you, you've got Germany here and Austria, the neighbour. Now, Austria, the neighbour, was the land of Hitler's birth. It was also a country that had once been part of the larger German Empire, and it was also a place that had the same culture, language, and history as Germany. So Hitler wanted Anschluss. This was just to link up, to unite the two countries. So in 1938, this lesson is going to investigate what happened in that year and how Hitler took over the country of Austria. So we're going to start to see how firstly he began by encouraging and how it eventually ended up with an invasion. That's what we're going to investigate today. As I'm talking you through the outcomes of today's lesson, could you write down today's title, please? So why was the Anschluss of 1938 significant? So hopefully by the end of today's lesson, what we'll be able to do is make and justify a reasoned judgment about how significant, that's just how important the Anschluss was. We're going to be able to, throughout the lesson, explain the details of what actually happened, how Hitler enabled himself to take over that land, and how it could possibly have led to war. So we're going to start off by looking at the details of the Anschluss. Make sure you pause, give yourself time to write down the title. I'm going to show you a short video clip now. All I want you to do is watch it and have a think about, as you're watching this, how do the Austrians react to this? Because we've seen that this is one of Hitler's aims. He wanted to take over Austria. So I want you to have a think about, well, how do the Austrians react when this takeover actually happens? And how do the British and French react? And that's going to give us a little bit of understanding before we break in
At the
today's work
in the
into
spring of
today's work
1938,
properly. So watch
Hitler
this
saw
clip
an
and see
opportunity
what
to
you
take
think.
the first step in achieving one of his most cherished dreams, to bring other German-speaking people under his rule. He capitalized on political instability in neighboring Austria, a country which had already come hugely under Nazi influence. After checking that no foreign power would interfere, he ordered German troops to cross the border. The majority of Austrians welcomed the Germans into their country. The Austrians, too, had suffered as their empire was dismantled in the settlement at the end of World War I. Now, united with Germany, they were a power once again.
It have been the nicest days of my life when we entered in Austria. I entered with Hitler in the 6th car. I had tears in my eyes. All my dreams of reuniting Austria with Germany. Don't forget, Austria was ruling Germany during 600 years. And so for me, after the defeat of the year 18 and Versailles, for us it was a dream.
I suppose a lot of people in England would say, well, they are Germans after all, and you know, that's what they really want. But it was, after all, a pretty nasty sort of takeover.
Deutsche Männer und Frauen, ich proklamiere, die älteste Ostmark des deutschen Volkes soll von jetzt ab das jüngste Bollwerk der deutschen Nation und damit des deutschen Raums sein.
Okay, so hopefully you've seen all of those massive crowds, you've seen the enthusiasm there, and you've seen that Hitler looks like he's going to get away with this. Let's have a look more deeply into the story. Your first task now then, Year 9, let's have a look at what the background to this Anschluss was. So, World War I had broken out after Austria had declared war on Serbia. Remember all that stuff about Franz Ferdinand that we looked at back in Year 8? They were then supported by their ally, Germany. Many people saw the alliance between Germany and Austria as threatening. Obviously, they're becoming much more powerful, uniting together, and therefore the Treaty of Versailles said that the two nations were never allowed to unite. Many Germans felt this was unfair, as there was a lot of cultural similarities between the two nations. Even Hitler himself was an Austrian. He wrote in his book Mein Kampf, which is My Struggle in English, that Austria should be part of a greater Germany. So what I'd like you to do, just very, very quickly, really simply, is write in your book, why was Austria important to Hitler? So it's going to be about, of course, his aims, isn't it? It's going to be about breaking the Treaty of Versailles. It's going to be about those similarities and also about the background here of Hitler himself. Just pause and give yourself 2 minutes to answer that question. Let's have a look then at what actually happened. So in 1934, so this was just 1 year after Hitler had taken power in Germany, the Austrian Nazi Party had been established over the border in Austria, and they tried and failed to take over the Austrian government. They had killed the Austrian Chancellor, a man named Dollfuss, and Hitler had wanted to go and help the Nazis. However, another one of Austria's neighbours was Italy. And at this point, it would have been dangerous for Hitler to have taken over Austria because Italy could have stood in their way. So Hitler was very concerned and made no moves in 1934. In 1936, Hitler made a good deal with Mussolini. They made the Rome-Berlin Axis alliance. So at this point, from 1936 onwards, Hitler felt confident that if he took over Austria, his ally Mussolini over in Italy would do nothing to stop him. So he waited for the right opportunity. And the right opportunity came up in January of 1938. The Austrian Nazis, who had already tried to take over in 1934, they now rioted and they called for union, they called for Anschluss. So this time, they didn't manage to kill the next Austrian Chancellor, Schuschnigg. What they did was they forced him into a corner. What he did, because they created so much trouble in Austria, was he banned them. He banned the Austrian Nazi Party and he arrested the leaders. Hitler the next month met with Schuschnigg and demanded the union of Germany and Austria. Britain and France, watching this from afar, did nothing, made no interventions whatsoever. They didn't offer Schuschnigg any support, any advice. They kept out of it. When Schuschnigg returned to Austria after having met with Hitler, he organised a plebiscite, a vote. And this was going to give the Austrian people the choice. Would you like to be part of a union with Germany, or would you like Austria to remain independent? What he expected was that the Austrian people would vote no, and they would want to remain an independent country. Hitler was absolutely furious because he believed that what the election would do would show that the Austrian people weren't ready for the union and actually he would lose. So in March, so 2 months after the original kind of rioting and problems, Hitler decided, I'm going to invade. I'm going to invade before the vote. So he took over Austria, he marched in, very, very little opposition. He arrested 20,000 Austrians that he believed might make trouble or be difficult for him before the vote was held. He then decided to hold the vote to show what it was that the Austrian people wanted. In the vote, 99.75% of the people who actually voted, they voted in favour of the union with Germany. He'd blitzed the Austrian people with propaganda. And of course, he'd arrested people that might make trouble and intimidated others. He'd now broken the Treaty of Versailles and Austria's treaty, which was called Saint-Germain. Neither Britain and France had acted at all. That's our events. Here's your task then, Year 9. What I would like to do is, in a moment when I finish speaking, I want you to pause this for a moment and I want you to write down the letters of any of these statements that have true information. So, for example, the first statement reads, in 1934, the Nazis took over Austria after they killed Dollfuss, the Austrian Chancellor. If you think that statement is true, in your book, you write down A. I'm going to give you a clue. It's not true, is it? Because in 1934, the Nazis tried to take over Austria, but they failed. So just write down the letters of any that you think are true. Don't worry, we're going to check it in a moment, but I want you to have a go at it on your own first, please. So pause this, have a go. Here's your answer then. So what we've got is a list of ones that are absolutely right. I want you to jot those down in your exercise book. So just write them, it's a little sequence, because this is what happened in Austria. So you might want to write Austria, what happened, and then write down all of these ones here that I've highlighted in yellow in your exercise books. Pause this, do that now, please. So why was this significant? Why was it an important event? We've seen that Hitler has been successful, he's taken over land, but how did that help him? Well, it was an absolute triumph for Germany. Hitler now had the resources of Austria at his disposal. So any of their coal, any of their industry, anything that they had. So it also included their army. Lots of iron, lots of steel in Austria too. This was very, very useful. Another thing that it allowed Hitler to do was to get rid of another thing that he saw as an injustice and unfairness of the Treaty of Versailles. It allowed him to get rid of that. And this, of course, allowed him to grow more confident. He got away with this, and he was convinced that Britain and France, BNF as I've written it there, Britain and France, would always back down. They had let him essentially invade another country. It made lots and lots of British people, including the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, believe that appeasement, giving in to Hitler, was the only option in order to preserve peace. Anschluss was not unpopular in Austria. The Austrian people had shown that they were behind Anschluss. The results were exaggerated by Nazi presence, but many Austrians did welcome being in part of this glorious new Germany that seemed to be achieving so much. And this is a key reason why the British didn't want to act. The Austrians had clearly, even after the invasion, really voted for this. Even if some of those votes weren't true, there was a wave of support for this. Germany now possessed land on 3 sides of the western part of Czechoslovakia. If you go back to the very first slide of this lesson, you'll see how it looked as if, that first section of Czechoslovakia looked like it needed to go to Germany. This area was called the Sudetenland, and Hitler very, very firmly now had this in his sights. He was preparing, and it demonstrated how valuable Hitler's alliance was with Mussolini. What I'd like you to do under the side heading, why was the Anschluss significant, is just jot down the key ideas from this slide, please. Just pause it, give yourself 4 or 5 minutes. So it may seem surprising that Britain and France did nothing. This was the first time that Hitler had actually taken over another country. Remember what he'd done already? What he'd done already was he'd rearmed. Yes, he'd broken the Treaty of Versailles. Yes, he'd put troops in the Rhineland, but he hadn't actually taken over foreign territory. This was the first time that he'd done this. So Britain and France did absolutely nothing, and that may have been quite surprising, but actually Britain had sympathy with Germany. Austrians were seen to be German because they spoke German. They had the same tradition. They had the same culture. And they had demonstrated through the vote they very much wanted it. It'd be really difficult to go to war with Hitler saying you've invaded a country when that many people living in the country clearly wanted him there. The British government also remained more scared, remember, about Russia. They were really worried that if Hitler wasn't strong in the centre of Europe, that communism would spread throughout. So what they saw Germany as was a barrier, a buffer between the rest of Europe and communism. So, and the fact that Hitler hated communism made that really strong. Again, just pause this, just 2 minutes this time, jot down some of the key reasons why Britain and France didn't act. You're now going to go back to your teacher and do your plenary. What you're going to think about is, well, was Hitler actually achieving his aims now that he'd got Austria as well? Think about how much they'd done to break the Treaty of Versailles, unite German speakers, create living space, destroy communism. So you go back to your teacher on Teams and you can do a little activity on Mentimeter, just to sum up your understanding from today.